Hello everybody. We're going to be continuing our look through the 20th century at some of the master games. And this game I'm going to show you today is a game played in 1915 in the New York Masters between Capablanca and Michelsen. And Capablanca was white. He started with e4. And until recently, the most common move, e5. I think now c5, the Sicilian, is the most popular move at this point in time, but I think then it was by far and away e5. Knight f3. And the most popular response is knight c6, but here a Petrov was chosen with knight f6. White takes, d6. Knight f3, knight takes, d4. d3 is less common, but it is played, keeping the symmetry, but here white goes for a slight space advantage with the pawn. d5. So here both sides plan to develop calmly with bishop d3 and black mirrors. Now quick castling, get the king off the open e-file, very, very sensible. And here, Capablanca actually plays quite a nice move, gaining a little space with c4. So he's trying to threaten and overload, deflect the pawn, because the pawn has a duty to defend his knight on e4. So if pawn takes c4, white can just win a piece. And the pawn is not defended by its fellow yet, so white could simply take the pawn here. That's what he's threatening. So a person like me might well have played c6 here, just to keep the pawn structure intact. But Michelsen played bishop e6, which could well be stronger. But I just don't like the idea of not being able to take on c4. I want to take white's pawn. So, yeah, bishop e6 is good, developing a bishop. And now rook e1. So targeting the knight some more. Here, I disagree with what Michelsen played. He protected the knight again with f5. So now there's no threat to take the knight and then recapture on e4. And the pawn on d5 can now capture white's pawn on c4. But it does weaken the black king somewhat to have the diagonal a2 to g8 opened up, and it also weakens squares in black's half of the board on e5 and e6. No pawn can now protect those squares. And okay, you could say that the knight on e4 is worth giving up those two squares for, but white isn't powerless here. What white can do is kick the knight away with f3 at a later point. So black won't really have gained anything from the advance f5. I just don't like that move. I would have played rook e8. And here, this is main line. White could take twice on e4, but then black could take on c4 with the bishop. So white isn't winning any material. It develops another piece, the rook, and it just keeps the kingside pawn structure intact. Again, f5 might not prove to be a huge weakness, but it is a potential weak spot, and I don't like weakening myself for not really a lot of reason when rook e8 would have been just as good, if not better. So after f5, white chooses to gain a bit of space. Just before we see Capablanca's move, I think here that queen b3 is well worth looking at. So it's targeting b7, of course, and d5. So a line I looked at was takes, bishop takes, takes, check, king h8. So white has an isolated queen's pawn here, but I do like white's coordination. Even I know that white's not developed that well, but after knight c3, the rook on e1 is very good. It's on the open file. White's got two knights that are quite well coordinated. The bishop cannot yet come to g5, but as black's knight on e4 is under attack, that might change very quickly. And I don't feel that black has enough time to really coordinate his forces. Not to mention that white could even push his queenside pawn, his queen pawn, up to d5, where it could easily be very annoying for black to deal with, as he wouldn't be able to play knight c6. So I like white in this position. This wasn't played, but I feel it's a worthy continuation. I'd be happy to carry on as white here. Going back, queen b3 wasn't played. Instead, space gaining move was played. Can you see what white played here? Yeah, you need to consider the implications of this move. c5. Now, in terms of pawn structure, this might actually be quite weak because the d4 pawn is now the base of white's pawn chain, d4 to c5, and a central pawn being the base is quite is not to be desired. And also, black can easily undermine the pawn with b6 later, giving white an isolated queen's pawn that might be very weak. And also, I think it also releases tension on d5, which could have been a good area of attack for white. But in those long-term considerations are, I feel, trumped by the piece play that occurs here, because black's bishop now doesn't really have anywhere to go. That's another reason why, instead of bishop e6, I would have played c6, giving c7 for my dark squared bishop. So bishop e7 has to be played, and white can now, I say it's not really infiltrating, to be honest, but I like using that word, knight e5. So you're just inside black's half of the board, so in a way you've infiltrated, but I consider infiltration to be like jumping into the heart of black's camp, usually on 7th rank or causing a lot of damage. But knight e5 is a very useful move, and it also allows for f3 to be played soon, as well as controlling lots of light squares. So black wants to get rid of white's knight, and white actually allows this. He, in fact, insists on it with knight takes d7. And what would you play in this position for black? Well, this wasn't played in the game, but if I was black, I would just consider the natural queen takes d7. Developing the queen, connecting the rooks, it's coordinating better with the rest of the pieces on the board. It seems perfectly logical. But watch what happens here. f3 and knight f6, queen e2. Now this can be horrible for black. If black moves the bishop on e6, then e7 is dropping off. So the only move I can really see is king f7. And now, bishop f4, you need to coordinate quickly as black. You're cramped, but you still can improve the pieces with rook a, e8. And here there's a nasty tactic with bishop takes c7. This just wins a clear pawn, and black is still not quite coordinated. I might play bishop d8 here, but you may think, oh well, what's the problem? I can just play bishop takes c5. Now my rook is guarding e6, so the queen can take the white bishop, and I'm not a pawn down anymore. So you may just look at d4 takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and black's fine, no problem. But I think there might be something you've missed here. What could white play to win material? Well, if you spotted it, fantastic. White can play bishop e5, defending the pawn and getting his bishop out of danger. Black needs to retreat the bishop, and it's not just white's rook and queen that are forming a battery along the f-file. White's queen and bishop are also forming a battery, so bishop b5 skewers the queen to the rook, or the rook to the queen, and black is now going to have to lose the exchange. So this is a very good position for white, big plus. So that might have been why queen takes d7 was not played by Michelsen. Instead, bishop takes d7 was played, which does look rather passive and not a good move, but maybe it is best given the tactics. f3 kicks the knight, and black's only good piece is now forced to retreat. And here, this is what I would call infiltrating. I mostly associate infiltration with rooks. It can be other pieces, but you generally see it with rooks and queens. Rook e5 here. So now it's attacking the f5 pawn. And I cannot understand black's next move. I think he just missed a tactic here. But what would you play if you were black in this position? Well, I feel that g6 doesn't really help out very much. Bishop h6 could be played with tempo, and then perhaps queen e2 or e1, knight c3 and rook a1 to e1. So I feel that white would be very, very coordinated here. So I think what I would do as black is play c6, and if white wants the pawn, he can have it. Take, rook takes, and the exchange has eased black's troubles with coordinating. So b6 undermines white's pawn structure. I think white does have to take, and now queen takes, and black's pieces start to come to life here. Knight c3, rook a e8, and I think maybe black doesn't quite have enough compensation for the pawn, but I feel that he's in the driving seat, and he can cause quite a few problems in white's camp. So while it may not quite be enough for the pawn, it's certainly enough to be able to play good chess and be able to really have a good fight in in the game, not just be passive and allow white to squash you. So that's the way I play anyway. I'm a more dynamic attacking player, but I do bear positional concepts in mind as well. But yeah, this is definitely my kind of position. I would love to play as black here, preferably with with a pawn on b7, so I'm not down a pawn. But you know, you can't have everything. So that is what I would do. Instead, though, knight e8 was played. I think the idea was to guard f5 with the rook, but now Capablanca simply says, thank you, I'll take the central pawn. Queen c8 is played, getting out of the pin, threatening things like bishop c6, possibly. So rook e5, and bishop f6. So I think Black's plan was for white's rook to move, and then bishop takes d4, check, regaining the pawn, and sort of solving some of the problems with white's infiltration and space advantage. But what is the flaw in that plan? Yeah, white can play check. So now the queen's guarding at d4. So king h8, rook e2. Now, rook e2 is an interesting move because the reason you wouldn't play rook e1, can you see why? Why doesn't white play rook e1 instead? Yeah, he's thinking very far ahead here. What he's planning to do is move the knight, the bishop on c1, and the queen, and then play his rook on a1 to e1. And that way he'll be able to double on the only open file and have a good initiative and active pieces, very well coordinated pieces. So that's the reason he's not he's not planning on playing rook a1 to d1 and having the other rook on the e file. He wants a doubled rooks on the e file. It's quite aggressive. So c6 is played to prevent white playing pawn d4, d5, I mean, and being unchallenged. So that's fine. White can develop his bishop. b6 finally is played, trying to undermine white's pawns. So if white takes, then pawn takes, and perhaps black is getting back into the game. But knight c3 and knight c7 is played. So black doesn't want to take because then white would get rid of his backward pawn. So black's keeping the tension, which is generally a good idea, but I feel that white already has a good enough advantage to not be too troubled by his pawn structure. Queen d3. So again, there's a few sort of small threats of the queen is targeting f5, the queen and bishop battery are set up on a6. It's very, very small, but it's also just sort of having your queen vaguely pointing at things and being able to coordinate with the pieces. That usually does create threats on its own. So I would have played b5, but rook d8 was played. Now white follows through with the plan of doubling with rook a e1. So white's pieces are all very well connected and having a lot of space. And black's pieces do look very cramped. Only the bishop on f6 is even off of black's second rank. So I feel that black is slowly getting squashed here. B takes is played. D takes, okay, great. White solved the pawn structure problem. Now black has almost no advantage at all. Well, black has no advantage. That was the only potential long-term advantage if black could survive to a late middle game or early end game. And here, the move I would play to try and gain something as black would be bishop e6. Just, you know, threatening white's queen, bit of a cheapo. So bishop d6, takes, takes. I'm trying to swap off as black. Takes, takes, knight d5. So, you know, potentially if I could sort of prevent white's rooks being so active and counter them with my own rooks, then I feel that my minor piece, the knight, could be just as good as white's bishop. But it's very hard to counter white's rooks. So queen d7, rook e5, maybe f4. And I feel that I'm slowly getting if I was black, I'd be slowly getting squashed again, because look at the position now. I mean, the rooks are just running circles around me. So black's pieces are still having to be very passive. And perhaps there wasn't really any hope at the beginning, it just looked optically better. So I might have gone down in flames in this variation, but perhaps it is still better than what happened to black in the game. Here, either rook takes g7 or queen takes g7 are both terrible. Queen takes g7, rook takes, king takes, bishop e7, and black has to surrender the exchange. And yeah, white would win here quite easily. 2 pawns and a queen for a rook and a knight is up quite a bit on material, as well as the rook and knight are very hard to coordinate. They work well together. And also black's king is quite exposed. There'll be lots of forks and double attacks and the rest. So yeah, this might have been a position I would have reached as black, and I'd probably resign in a few moves. But going back, this didn't happen in the game though. Instead, after d takes c5, black actually played knight b5, and now takes. So okay, all right, the pawn on c5 is being attacked by the queen. Bishop d6 again. Bishop c6 and knight d5. So white's pieces are clearly doing a very good job here, and I can't really see that black has much of a chance of creating anything. I can't see any form of counterplay. That's one of the things that you need, really, if you're material down. I've done a video on swindling, of how to lay traps and trick your opponents into either losing or letting you back in the game, and maybe you could draw from a lost position. But for that, you need counterplay. You need to have your pieces in active positions. They need to at least be able to create threats. They have to be able to work together. But here black's pieces just, they look woebegone. They don't look like they can do much. So black swaps, trying to swap down to being only a pawn down, where he might be able to possibly draw. And g6 is played to allow, partly to allow the black bishop maybe to retreat to g7, defending f5 so the black queen can move. So g6 doesn't look too bad, but can you see the move Capablanca now played, which is, according to the computer as well as my own judgment, it's the best move on the board, and it pretty much wins on the spot. Okay, 10 more seconds. Rook e7. Fantastic move. Just infiltrating perfectly. Rook on the 7th. A very principled move. And black here cannot take. Can you see why? Why can't black take the rook on e7? Yeah, white has a mate in 2 with bishop e5 check, and the king can't avoid the check, and you can't capture the bishop, so the only thing left to do is block, and white just takes it. So this would be checkmate. Quite a nice checkmate, actually. So black doesn't fall for that. Capablanca succeeded in getting his rook to the 7th, and here there's not really a lot of chances because Queen f7 is going to be played next move, with the same idea that if black takes, then bishop e5 will just win. So there are lots of checkmates all being threatened. So black desperately plays rook d7. And what did Capablanca here to force resignation? To be honest, if I was Capablanca, I would have played Queen f7, just going for checkmate here, which I think is sort of more fun, to be honest. But that didn't happen in the game. I think it's prettier playing Queen f7, to be honest. Don't know why Capablanca didn't play it. What's wrong with him? No, White played Rook takes d7, by far the simpler move. And here Capablanca won by resignation, because if Queen takes Rook, then again the simplest move is Queen takes Rook. And black is getting, well, is a rook down, but also after bishop d8, what does white play here to completely extinguish all hope? Yeah, just rook e7 again. And I think this is a checkmate in about 6 moves anyway, but even if it isn't, black is going to have to sacrifice his queen and his bishop for the rook. He's going to have to play queen takes e7, bishop takes e7, and then after black's king tries to run away, white can take black's bishop on d8 as well. So yeah, I don't think even if Magnus Carlsen was playing as black in this position, that he would be able to avoid checkmate in about 15 moves or under. So even if I was white, I mean, I know I can sometimes screw up a little bit, but I'm not that bad. So yeah, this was a very interesting game actually. I thought that White's piece coordination in the early middle game was very, very good, because he used his pawn space advantage to trade off favourably after knight takes, and had worked out queen takes ran into trouble, so black's bishops were rather passive, and then reduced black's pieces so that they were qualitatively bad, and then just simply was bold enough to throw the rook up the board and create threats against black. And this proved that there wasn't much harmony in the black camp. There wasn't any coordination here. And Michelsen's attempts to reroute his pieces, they fell a bit flat, to be honest, because white could play simple, effective chess to safeguard his material advantage, and had enough foresight to play a move like rook e2 so that he would connect the rooks together. And black didn't really have any way of stopping white simply improving the pieces. So minor pieces improved, check. Queen moves to allow the rooks to connect, check. And now the rook's double. So this play is fantastic, and it's just so principled. You can't really point out any clear mistakes that white has made here. I mean, there possibly very early on there might have been a couple of small opening improvements, but on the whole, white's pieces are perfectly aligned with each other. They're all doing good jobs. They all have a function, and this is just a positional crush here. Black's pieces are just awful throughout almost the entire game, and White knows that he doesn't mind swapping off, because normally you would think, okay, I need to keep the pieces on so that I can prove my pieces are getting better and better. His are staying bad, so I can then win with the pieces. But Capablanca realised that what he was doing was he was swapping off pieces, but the pieces that remained on the board were slowly getting so much better than the counterparts that it didn't matter that there are only a couple of rooks, a queen, and a bishop each. The queen is centralised, for example. Bishop is infiltrating, and is fairly centralised. It's defending a key passed pawn, reducing Black's mobility. The white rooks are both on the only open file. Really, I mean, I don't really count the D file because White's bishop is not going to be dislodged. And also White's king is perfectly safe. Whereas Black's bishop is hitting thin air, b2 isn't really threatened, and even if White's rook was on e3, bishop takes b2 isn't really relevant to the nature of the position. And the queen and the rooks are all in each other's way and aren't really threatening or able to go anywhere. So a move like g6 just opens up the king more. Not that I could see any better moves. And White can now just, again, use a principled idea to infiltrate and win the game. And Black then goes down in flames and is lost here. So I hope you got something from this video. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.